Okay, today we're going to be talking about the contributions of Greece. We're going to look at architecture, we're going to look at the religions, we're going to look at the philosophies, and then we'll take a deeper dive into the philosophies in class. So let's get started. We're going to talk first about religion. The Greeks were polytheistic, like a lot of the people around that were around at the same time. Okay, they worshipped many gods, and they created a whole mythology based on these gods. You should be familiar with them from learning about them in English class. Everyday experiences were explained in terms of the gods. Gods had human flaws and characteristics, so they put a human face on the gods. They have 12 major gods. I'm only going to go into a couple of them here. The major one is Zeus. He is the chief god. He rules the universes. He used thunder and lightning and earthquakes. And you have a picture of him on the top right. Very imposing character. Slayed his father, who was a titan, I believe, and burst out of his head. Poseidon is Zeus's brother. He is the ruler of the seas. Hades is also Zeus's brother. He rules the underworld. The Greeks didn't really have what we would call a hell, but they called it the underworld, which was, I guess, where you went when you didn't behave. Then you had Hestia, the sister of Zeus. She is the goddess of the hearth and home. And then you have Hera, who is the wife of Zeus. She is the goddess of marriage. And then you have Athena, who is the patron goddess of the city of Athens. She is the daughter of Zeus. She's the goddess of wisdom and agriculture. And you have a statue of her on your bottom right. She was supposedly born by emerging from Zeus's forehead. So you have the whole Greek pantheon of gods. They kind of dictate life in general, and much of the mythology and much of the writing from that period is done with the gods. You had temples all over the place where people worshipped, and different cities had patron gods and patron goddesses, much like Athens with Athena, and it was a whole culture grown up around them. Okay, brings us to Mount Olympus, the home of the gods. In the background there, the gods supposedly lived on Mount Olympus, but then they interfered with what was going on in modern day life. And around Greece, there's areas where there were what was called oracles. And these were usually virgins, female, who kind of lived in almost like, there's some mention that they possibly were drugged into this state, and they supposedly interpreted the messages of the gods. And anytime you were, if you were a king or somebody else, if you were going to embark on a war or something like that, you would consult the oracle to make sure that the gods were going to be in your favor. Okay, so that is the Greek religion. Now, the Greek religion also influences the Olympic Games, which we have a reincarnated modern version today. The idea behind the Olympic Games was they were to honor Zeus. They took place every 4 years. They were for men only, and all fighting, especially during the time of the Peloponnesian War, stopped during the games. And if you look at the diagram of the ancient Olympia, this is where the games supposedly took place. You'll notice that there's several temples, one to Zeus, one to Hera, his wife. There's a sacrificial altar. Everybody brought their treasury along with them. And then you had a whole big gymnasium or gymnastics area where most of the competition took place. And a lot of the competitions were much more, you didn't have hockey games and things like that where you had a lot of the track and field style events, and it was mostly demonstrating your prowess as a warrior. Okay, that brings us to Greek philosophy, which kind of grew out of the ideas of the Greeks. We've already talked about what a philosophy is. The word philosophy means lover of wisdom. They used observation and reason to try to understand why things happened. Okay, they looked at the world around them and interpreted what they thought. And the three major philosophers who grew out of the Greek philosophy, or the three schools of thought, were Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And you're going to want to copy this chart into your notes. And again, we'll be taking a deeper dive into all three of these guys in class. Socrates developed what's called the Socratic method, which is a method of just questioning people. You learned about what they believed and what they thought by asking them questions. Eventually, he got so annoying that the government put him to death. He was forced to drink hemlock, and it killed him. Plato, it's thought, possibly made up Socrates and used him as his method for teaching. The other school of thought says that Socrates was Plato's original teacher, and Plato used Socrates as his main character to talk about his ideas and to put them forth. Okay, Plato believed government should control the lives of the people, so he was kind of a legalist from the Chinese side. Okay, he divided society into three classes. He said there were workers, philosophers, and soldiers, and he believed that the philosophers should be running things. Okay, Aristotle, who was a descendant of Plato, he was the teacher of Alexander the Great. He believed in one strong and good leader ruling, hence his relationship with Alexander. And he believed that people should learn through reason. Okay, you had to think through a problem, much like I try to get you guys to do in class. Okay, moves on to literature. And you've already studied some Greek literature when you studied the Odyssey in English class. The first Greek plays developed from religious festivals. There were stories about the gods, and they were usually the plots of the plays. Then you had Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, who wrote tragedies or stories of human conflict. And you had many other Greek playwrights who wrote comedies. They were kind of the inventors of the modern play, and many of the same ideas that the Greeks put forth show up in modern plays. And then you have Homer, who, like I said, you've already read after reading the Odyssey. He also wrote one called the Iliad. These were epic poems, and they were designed to tell a historical story. Obviously, there's some embellishment there. It tells the story of the Trojan War. And modern day authors are inspired by these. You've had movies on the Odyssey from time to time. So it's still a very popular topic, and obviously we still think it's important enough to teach you about it in class. The Greeks also applied observation and logic to their writing of history. Herodotus, who we've talked about in class, we've read some of his stuff, the Battle of Thermopylae. He is often called the father of history because of his careful writing of history. He interviewed people that had been there, supposedly, and used source documents. Okay, so that's literature. Then the Greek art and architecture. And we'll look a little bit more deeply at this probably in class, either towards the end of the week or maybe the start of next. Greeks believed in beauty, balance, and order in the universe. Everything in their art and architecture had to show this. Okay, Greek paintings and statues were lifelike, but they also showed the human body in its most perfect form. It didn't show the flaws, and everything was in balance. The arms were the right length. The legs, everything was in the right proportion to the way it should be. Okay, we're going to see when we get to the Middle Ages that we lose this ability to do this. The Greeks and the Romans perfect it, but then it goes away and it doesn't come back for 1,500 years. Okay, the Parthenon, that building on the right, which you've probably seen in numerous pictures, it's designed so that the columns bow in the middle, which makes it look a little lighter, but also makes them look straight. It's an optical illusion. Okay, and then they had achievements in science, and some people that we use their ideas today. You're probably learning about some of these subjects in other classes. You have the astronomer Aristarchus, and he discovered that the Earth rotates on an axis and moves around the sun. Now, this idea was thrown out later, but came back during the period of the Renaissance and then into the age of exploration. Archimedes, he was a brilliant engineer, and he explored the principles of the lever and the pulley. Okay, some of the basic ideas of physics. He's also the guy that realized that the theory of displacement, that things take up space. And you can see him up in the top right. He's sitting in his bathtub, and he fills it up with a certain amount of water. And he was trying to determine, supposedly, whether the crown of the king had been stolen and replaced with a fake. And he used some mathematical principles. By putting it in the bathtub and the water overflowed, he was able to prove that it was the real thing. Hippocrates is the father of medicine. Okay, he studied causes of illness, looks for cures. Doesn't quite get to the germ theory, but he gets a lot of the ideas of good health. And some of the principles of good health are still around today, taking care of yourself and trying to keep your body in balance and moderation. And then a couple guys from mathematics who you should be familiar with. Pythagoras, I'm sure you're familiar with his theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Have a little picture of that. And the whole idea of a hypotenuse. This is how we measure a right triangle. And then the guy on the bottom right is Euclid. And he wrote a book that would be the basis for modern geometry. So those of you who are taking geometry right now, you have him to thank for it. Okay, so you'll be doing this. We'll learning more about Socrates in class. But remember that Socrates used to go around and ask people questions. Okay, and he would ask everyone about their political and religious beliefs, and he would kind of badger you until you answered his questions. A lot of people tried to avoid him. Oh, here comes Socrates, and they'd cross the street and go the other way, so he wouldn't be able to grab a hold of them. Okay, so imagine if he lived around here today, and no, it's not me. Okay, if he asked everyone about their political and religious beliefs as he did in classical Athens, how popular do you think he would be? And what would happen to him? Write me a paragraph for class tomorrow with your thoughts. Turn them in, and I'll be checking them along with your chart comparing Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato. And that's all for now.